going to mute everybody just so you know. And I'm going to probably turn off video. So if you want to turn off your own video, you can do that, or I can go through and do that. So it's like most of you have. All right, sorry, more people coming in. So I'm Carissa Heckathorn, the director of the Iowa Quilt Museum. We are located in Winterset, Iowa. We're on the historic square, and I think we're in our 6th year now. And we are a nonprofit, and unlike some museums, we are an exhibit only museum. So we switch out our quilts about 4 times a year, and we don't actually have a collection. We do have a couple of educational quilts, but that's about it. And so this right now, we're still celebrating orange with our exhibit Here Comes the Quilt, curated by Joe Cunningham. And we have our guests today are Roderick and Bill and Linda. And they are all professional quilt collectors. And they each have about 3 quilts in our exhibit right now. And they're very different styles. I'd say the Volckening Collection has very traditional, absolutely exquisite 1940s, 30s quilts. And then Roderick has very unconventional 1970s quilts that are fun. So you'll get to see a wide range of quilts. And they're gonna tell us a little bit more about why they collect quilts and how they got started. So we're going to start with Roderick. And he can introduce it. Whoops, I think he's muted. Hold on, Roderick. Can you, okay. There you go.
Can you hear me now?
Gotcha.
Can you hear me now? Thank you for inviting me. It's been fun to participate in a number of exhibitions at the Iowa Quilt Museum. And Joe Cunningham, who's a friend and has been a friend for a long, long time. We go way back. Sometime last autumn said, I'm curating a show at Iowa Quilt Museum. Do you have any orange quilts? And I said, well, as a matter of fact, I'm doing a show at Hello Stitch in Berkeley, which I've done a red show. But had decided on going up the chakras and doing orange. So I thought great minds think alike. And I've seen many of the quilts in the show and have heard a number of the quilt makers talk. And it really is a wonderful show. And with the horrible weather you've been having, it's great to have something bright and sunny. So
it really is. It really is.
I put together a few quilts, and please, Carissa, tell me how much time I have to do this this presentation early part.
I'd say 20 minutes, and then
okay. And then when I'm only on the 3rd slide in 15 minutes, let me know.
I'll just mute you, Roderick. No problem.
Okay, great. I'll just keep talking. And okay, so. Prepared a few slides here, and let's see, why isn't it now? Oh, okay. This is a quilt that was the poster child for the Hello Stitch show. It looks like a blazing sunshine to me, or these big orange balls. The interesting thing about it is it was a quilt. I don't remember exactly when it came into me, the collection, but I hung it up, or when I got it, I wasn't all that excited about it. It wasn't as good as it looked like in the picture to me. I think part of it was the binding was a little worn, and the quilt itself is a little soft, but I hung it up in the quilt barn just to look at it, and some people would come in and kind of just immediately go to that and look at it and be amazed and ooh and ah over it. And then within the last year, I posted it on Instagram, and it got more likes than any quilt I've posted. So I thought, well, this is a crowd pleaser, and people really loved it. At the Hello.
I think it's the softness around the big bright orange.
Yeah. And I think initially I wanted that to be stronger, but I've really appreciated the softness of it. And then
Yeah.
each halo around the sun, she did something different.
Oh,
So
wow.
I'm going to start with a really wonderful quilt. And Bill and I happen to have one of each of these quilts. Julie Silber found it, a picker of hers in Southern California, found these two polyester double knit, enormous. I think they're almost 100 by 100 double wedding rings. And thanks to Julie Silber, she called me up right away and said, I've got these two wonderful quilts. I wonder if you might be interested. And the collection I have, one of the very first quilts I actually bought was a wonderful African-American double wedding ring quilt. So it's not a pattern that I've particularly loved, the more traditional pastel-y ones, but when I was able to come across something that was really unique and kind of unconventional or unexpected, I would jump on it. So I love this. Julie said there were two. I looked at both. I thought, okay, I'm not going to be greedy. I'll take the one that I like the best. And of course, I'm biased, Bill. I think mine's better, but that's just my personal opinion.
I think you guys need to do something on social media with that.
Yeah.
Who's his best?
I had this hanging in the quilt barn, and of course it came down onto the floor, but I turned the lights out and left, and it was like, wait a minute, there's lights still on. And I looked back, and that lime green it literally looked like it was glowing in the dark. And I just thought, this is pretty incredible. This is quite wonderful. And I'm glad that I shared, and that the second one is in Bill's collection. Another piece that a real favorite of mine, it's in Unconventional and Unexpected, both versions. It's on a new page now because Unconventional and Unexpected Volume 2 or second edition has expanded. There are new quilts in it. But and this one left my collection quite early. Soon after the book was published, I got approached by a collector saying, I want that quilt. So I decided to sell it. And again, I'm pleased that it's in a wonderful private collection, but it's just has always been a favorite of mine. Now, my Eurocentric bias, when I saw it, it's a log cabin variation. It looks like a courthouse steps.
Yeah.
The quilt is from New Orleans. I dated it circa 1950. No, I dated it. What did I date this quilt? It's early. I mean, it could be 40s to the 60s. There's early fabrics and they're later, and it's a mixture of fabrics. In the Fabric of a Nation show at MFA Boston, they have a Crayola Petway quilt of this arrangement that she called bricklayer. And I'd never heard that term before in any of the Southern quilts, but I understand why it would be called bricklayer.
Yeah.
But I just think theirs is red and white. It's a wonderful piece, but there's something about the printed fabrics and the solid fabrics in this that just, sail my boat. And I've had a number of contemporary quilt makers ask if they could do their own version of it. And it's been fun to put out quilts into the world and see how their other quilt makers or artists are inspired by the pieces and do their own versions of it.
Agreed.
This I call original design. This will be a new additional quilt in U&U 2, which I've come to call it. It was made by Odie Wright. It came to me with her name. But I could not find her in any genealogy records. And I spent a lot of time and others helped me. But finally, I was able to find her in genealogy records. It came out of Hale County, Alabama, circa 1960 to 1990. And I give a broad range on dating because fabrics can be around for a long time. Women can have, by this time, their mother and their grandmother's scrap bags. So those 9-patch blocks at the top and bottom might have been made by somebody else earlier. We just don't know that. But to me, it's just a piece of contemporary art. I love that upholstered fabric with the hunt and rider scene in it. The yellow fabric of the binding and that lower strip across the bottom until it reaches that bright yellow piece. That's all, and the backing is a yellow bed sheet, which again, I think is just wonderful.
So what percentage of these quilts that you collect have names, have labels?
When you say labels, what do you mean?
Like where they say who the maker was?
Oh, none of them had labels, but most of my quilts I got through dealers. I used eBay in the early days, then private dealers and private collectors would begin offering me quilts. And it was interesting when I first was buying, I was asking the people that I buy it from, like, do you know who made it? Yeah. And they were kind of dumbfounded as to, well, why would you want to know that information? And I said, well, it's the 20th century. It's nice to have that information. Most every state has done a quilt search day. I emphasize it in the American Quilt about identifying and keeping that history with the quilts. But but sometimes it would come with an attribution. The person would say, okay, it was made by, or I bought it from, but I kept that information, of course, but I wanted to then document it and just not put it out as kind of gospel truth. And if I do have a quilt, some of the quilts will say attributed to, which means we don't know exactly if it was made by them. But when I'm able to find somebody in census records, it's exciting. And I love that happening. This is a double-sided quilt, as you can see. I got really excited. A lot of quilts that came into the collection were double-sided. Either had a kind of a full-on quilt on the back, like this one, so it was a 2-for-1, or I'll show you some other backings that are just pieced fabrics, but done with intention around it. So I call this Blue Bars and Crosses. That's my own name, and if it's in the book, it's in quotes. If I've given it the name, the top or the front of it on the left is what I've identified as the front. That is in both books. I've never shown the back of the quilt before, so you're getting to see. Well, I've shown it probably in, it's not been published in any way.
Oh, wow.
So anyone that's on this talk are going to see some things that just haven't been published and see a little more into the depth of but I just love those 4 strong vertical bars of it. And then I love the cross motif. And again, I'm not seeing it as any particular religious symbolism, but it's just that cross, or sometimes a plus sign, has been used throughout art making in all various forms. And there was something about them. And again, other quilts in the collection, I get drawn to just that motif, that cross shape. I love that single blue bar, vertical bar on the back side, and then lots of red in it. This quilt I did find on eBay. It was pictured hanging over a chain link fence, which I just thought was brilliant. I said before, I would love to show it in a museum hanging over a chain link fence. I just think it's just so, and then also it was laid out flat on an asphalt driveway.
Oh, wow.
But there was a lot of attention to this quilt, and I went into it saying, I'm going to pay whatever I have to pay. And I did pay a good price on it. But I just had to have it.
That's cool.
Doesn't come with, it came out of Texas. Don't know the maker. I came to realize that Anonymous was still alive and creating beautiful quilts, beautiful pieces of art. So here's an example of my favorite backing of a quilt. This is shown in the book. Page number, it's on a double page spread, 174, 175. So I'm, little promotions of the book. But I don't show the front of it in the book. It was shown in the exhibition at the Sonoma Valley Museum of Art. After the book was released, did a show up there of a lot of quilts from the book. But there's just something, again, just so appealing to me of this 5 pieces of fabric that she put together. In the way she put it together here. She wasn't trying to line anything up, but she had a vision for this, to use these pieces of fabric, which again, I just find brilliant. And most of the quilts I'm really looking at from kind of an artist eye, or what visually appeals to me and where I see connections to modern and contemporary art. And so this really checks off all the boxes. Those square dancers at the bottom, that's connected to the piece above it. It's a border of that fabric. It's not pieced in there separately, but another quilt came along either years before or years after that had those square dancers, that square dance fabric in it as well. And that's always
where that
fun.
Dates back to?
I dated circa 1940 to 1960.
Okay, it's neat fabric.
Yeah.
Oh, someone says it's a feed sack.
Oh yeah. Well, how do I go back?
Oh, we had that one at the Iowa Quilt Museum.
That fabric?
We hung this quilt with both sides showing in the feed sack exhibition at the Iowa Quilt Museum. Lindsay McCrae.
This quilt?
So yeah.
Oh, great. Is Lindsay on?
Yeah, Mary Ann said Lindsay knows what she's talking about.
Oh,
yes.
absolutely. Absolutely. I forgot that was in the show. So you all
cool.
saw both sides there as well.
I didn't, but yeah, that's awesome.
Okay. Thank you, Lindsay, for that. Anyone else that wants to ask questions or put information in, please do. So this is an unfinished top, or it's an unfinished quilt, because the top is finished. It just has not had a backing or binding, and a backing and then quilted or tied. I love tops, and they've always kind of drawn at my heartstrings. They feel like orphans to me. And I mean, particularly, again, ones that I'm really, really love and am drawn to. And again, all of these plus signs or crosses just, again, floated my boat. And again, what I really like, upper left corner, second row down, first block in, is I think that's called a hummingbird pattern. It's not a cross, it's not a plus. So the mystery to me of why did she put that in? My feeling for the most part is not necessarily happy accident, but it was intentional. And I've heard other quilt makers say sometimes they finish a piece and look and go, why did I do that? Or how did I turn something the wrong way?
Yeah.
Either they take it out or they live with it. And I love those kinds of markers in it. Bottom row, there's a wonderful red. Reds have always been throughout the collection kind of the selling point for me. If it had some red in it, either a little bit or a lot, that really made the quilt. That was just an added bonus as well. How am I doing on time? This is another cross quilt that came later. It's published now in the second edition. It's made of cotton and flannel, sacking material, probably clothing from the family for which it was made. This has an attribution to a Mrs. Faith Gunter from Gordo, Alabama. I have not been able to find Mrs. Faith Gunter yet, but hopefully one day we will.
Someone's going to be on here and know who that is.
I hope. I really have hoped that would be the case sometime.
Right?
A simple one patch, and I love a one patch quilt. This has always been a favorite of mine. After I had purchased it, I was downtown walking near SF MoMA and walked around the corner, and there was a poster in the window of the bookstore of an Ellsworth Kelly. I thought it was a painting. I've learned since doing the research, they are collages made by Ellsworth Kelly. He made 8 of them. The title is Spectrum Colors Arranged by Chance. There are 8 collages that he made in France from 1951 to 1953. MoMA in New York has one, SF MoMA, Philadelphia, Art Institute of Chicago, the Glenstone Museum in Potomac, Maryland, and the Kravis Collection. There's one that it's not identified, but though again, I've just been intrigued by how modern or contemporary art was happening at the same time. This is a polyester double knit, so it was done later. But just that motif, that one patch motif, again, is a motif that has appeared throughout art. So when somebody from an untrained eye to a trained artist are working on things that can look similar, I'm always fascinated by that. I love the fact that it has printed fabric in it, that it's not just all solid colors. I love the kind of the squiggly, it looks like lightning bolts, that fabric that runs throughout. And then again, just the randomness of the placement of it. This quilt, or the photo of it, got lost. It wasn't in Unconventional Unexpected. It's not going to be in version 2 because there were other one patches already. So this wonderful quilt has gone unpublished so far. Let's see it.
I like that. Let's see what.
Dated circa 1960 to 1980.
Yeah.
I'm not sure where it is from, and I washed it last summer. That was a fun chore and a fun thing to do. And it got even brighter. That's the wonderful thing about polyester fabrics. Another polyester double knit.
Oh, wow.
Again, a simple 9 patch. This was in the Hello Stitch show. It was found in Oklahoma. I date it circa 1975 to 1990. The diagonal movement that this maker has created in it is so wonderful. And then again, it's got some kind of luminescent day glow colors that up the very top row, there's kind of that limey green, lime or lemony yellow that's very bright, different shade from the yellows on the right. Go down to about the middle, second row from the bottom, going across, and you'll see this. Sorry, I can't enlarge this, but that white and green fabric that is the only piece of that fabric in the quilt. Again, just another wonderful. And the orange, you can't, can you see my marker,
Yep.
my arrow?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, good. I should have been using it before. Right here where the oranges run into each other. Go down into the next block beside it or below it. I think it was a wonderful treatment. And it only is really in this, right, and then right here. So here's the green and white fabric that I was referring to. How am I doing on time?
Let's see, we have maybe a couple more.
Okay, and I'm almost done.
Oh,
Bill,
good.
you're
Okay.
soon. I called these broken grids, and I came a background from dealing in quilts, and most every quilt that I had dealt, sold, bought and sold, that had a grid formation, they were perfect. They all lined up, they matched. Well, I started finding all of these, mostly this time period, last half of the 20th century, where she didn't care if those grids or sashing lined up. And it just, again, I think it makes it so much more exciting and dynamic. So if that was a theme, there are a number of quilts in the collection or pieces that now are at the International Quilt Museum in Lincoln that have this motif, because I liked it a lot.
It gives it movement to me.
Yes, absolutely. So front and back of this, front and back. To me, this is one of the prize pieces in the collection, in my eye. I refer to it as original design, and then a bars back, but I lovingly call it Pegasus. Many of you will recognize that motif isn't the right word. The Pegasus, the red Pegasus, as a symbol. More recently, Mobil gas, but before Mobil, it was the Saucony Vacuum Oil Company that then went in, became Mobil Oil and Mobil Gas. This is a banner that was outside of a gas station, and I've seen old photos of old Saucony Vacuum Oil and then early Mobil gas stations. This was the sign that owner would use to signify it's a gas station, it's Mobil gas, come in and buy our gas. So that this cream color background is the flag that this Mobil, the Pegasus, is on. You can see all of these patches. I love this little cutout. But then it's what motivated this maker, came out of Missouri, no maker's name, but what motivated her to put this Pegasus flag on her quilt. But I think it's brilliant.
It is. I wonder if she's
she used rayon, wool, corduroy. This blue and some of the black is Panay velvet. It's so deep and rich. She tied it. We will go to the back side, the bars here, you really see the ties in it. I love it. You see the ties more down here, but you really see where they are on the back. But then there's some blank spots. Don't know what happened, if they originally didn't have the ties in them, or they came out. But in 1985, Andy Warhol did a series using this logo of the Pegasus. But I call this quilt pop art before Andy. This last one that I'm going to show, I've got two more, but I'll show those after Bill because they're contemporary quilts. I seem to have gotten starting to dabble in contemporary quilts. But again, this was a later acquisition. I wish I could enlarge it. I worked on it, but you can see it enlarged on page 132 and 1 to 133 in U&U 2. Mark French, a dealer who I got a number of quilts over the years, contacted me in 2012 and say, I've got a great yo-yo quilt. I want to show it to you. And I said, I hate yo-yo quilts. I'm not interested in yo-yo quilts. I had pretty much stopped. I thought I had stopped buying by this time, but he said, no, you want to see this, and I'm not going to send you a picture. I'll put it in a box. If you don't like it, send it back. So open this box. This is the only yo-yo I've seen since Rosie Lee Tompkins, the exhibition at Berkeley Art Museum Pacific Film Archives. She made some yo-yo quilts that had backings to them. They were small. I'd never, ever seen a yo-yo quilt before that had a backing on it. So you can't kind of poke your finger through the rosettes on this one. It's backed. And then just the brilliant way she created this circular with the varying colors and then moving out, varying her colors of the rings. Here in the center, here, and here are rosettes, rose clusters that have been cut out from a bedspread. I think probably polyester bedspread. She didn't finely cut them like an early 18th century beautiful applique where French or English fabric was cut out and perfectly appliqued. You see the background on it. Again, I think it's brilliant. I love this pink and yellow circle, particularly because it doesn't connect, it opens. And it's like it's allowing all of these circles to flow out and then radiate around a sun, since we're on that theme. Yeah. Fortunately, on the back of this, Laura Otto, the maker, wrote her name in pencil and her address, 21343 South Park Drive, Fairview Park, Ohio, 1964, and age 80. 80? So thank you, Laura, for identifying your quilt for us. She was born in 1881, died November 10th, 1971. But clearly I kept the quilt and said, thank you, Mark, for sending it to me. And you'll see it you've seen it in Unconventional, and you'll see it again if you get version 2. So Bill, your turn. And if we have time, I'll come back to 2 contemporary quilts that are now in the collection.
All right. Do you want to unshare your screen?
Yes, thank you.
All right. Carissa, do you have the photos that I sent you?
I do. Do you want me to bring those up?
That would be great. We can start with one that is NYB, Kentucky, or New York Beauty, Kentucky Beauty, something with Kentucky. It's a detail shot of a New York Beauty.
All right. Let me just, I don't know if I should do that. Okay. Let's see. Here it is.
There it is.
Let's see if I can make that bigger. There you go.
I need to get rid of them. Okay. Yeah, great.
We, our collection includes a lot of examples of this pattern, and this is one of the first things that I focused on when I first started collecting. My first antique quilt purchase was this quilt that was called a New York Beauty by the dealer who I bought it from. Her name is Shelley Ziegert, and you guys might know Shelley. This was one of her wonderful discoveries during the Kentucky Quilt Project, which was America's first quilt documentary project. And it was attributed to the McMillan family. I think it's Monroe County, Kentucky, 1860s, and beautiful, beautiful work. This is pretty much the type of thing that I looked for, and this is pre-Linda, when I was starting to collect quilts. And this one came a little bit later in the game, but the first one I bought was in 1989. I was pretty young, and
Wow.
but still recognized that quilts were very intriguing for a lot of different reasons historically, as they relate to women's creativity in America, how American quilt making has become after originating in other places. So this is a really prime example of the type of thing that I looked for. And originally, I didn't look at anything that was less than 100 years old. I didn't even look at 1930s quilts. I was not at all interested. There's a couple more examples from this period, and both of them came a little bit later. There's one that's Pointer, I think it should say.
There it is.
There it is, Pointer. This one is another quilt that came from Shelley. It was also discovered during the Kentucky quilt search, and it was made by Mrs. M.E. Pointer of Paducah, Kentucky. And even though this is a very old quilt, maybe 1850s or 60s, it also traveled with the Homefront and Battlefield exhibition a few years ago. There's something a little less structured about it that I like, and I'm sure Rod probably likes this too, that the sashing doesn't really meet up, and you got all these little circular berries all over the place, and it's just wonky and weird. But each of these clusters is centered around this wild red flower with an orange center and these almost Christmas cactus-like leaves that come out. But what are the round circles? Are they pokeberries? And that it came from Paducah. I just always loved this one. Anyway,
with good reason.
Pretty well-known quilt, and we picked up a few that were well-known, like these first two. There's another one. We'll jump ahead in time a little bit, but we'll jump back. Bring up the velvet fans, because that sort of goes with the whole idea of picking up quilts that were already kind of out there and discovered to enhance the collection. This one came from Laura Fisher in New York, and it was featured on the cover of Bob Shaw's wonderful book, which I have Rod's books here, but I don't have Bob's book here, American Quilts, A Democratic Art. And it was the first edition of his book. It's a quilt that was made around 1920s, has a very strong Art Deco influence, and it's made all of velvets and tied.
Wow.
One thing I should note as we're going through quilts is that I tend to veer toward technical discussions of quilts. And that was especially something that I did when I was working on my first book. Right here, New York Beauty. It has all of those examples of that pattern, that spiky pattern, and all the information that I could get about that. So that was my first collecting focus. But then eventually the collection expanded. So if we could jump back to the Cardoons, this is one that Linda can talk about. And since we're talking about collectors, this is one quilt that we actually bought together.
Yeah.
Remember how we did that?
Yeah, online. Yes. eBay.
It was an online auction, right?
Online auction. Yeah. The only reason we got it is because everybody was coming back from Quilt Mart, right?
Quilt Market. They
yeah.
were down in Houston. All the dealers, Julie, they were sitting there unpacking their booths while this auction was going on.
And that's why he couldn't believe there was no other collectors looking at it. And he concluded that was why.
It's a magnificent 1850s quilt with a motif that a lot of historians will call strawberry, but I don't feel like it resembles a strawberry at all. I did a blog post about what the motif could be on my Wonky World blog. It's willywonkyquilts.blogspot.com, and it's called Strawberries or Cardoons. And cardoons were they're kind of like artichokes, and they were part of the colonial garden. I think they were somewhat ornamental. The scale of these blooms here on this quilt is enormous, and the little flowers that are in the border almost look more like, the little leaves almost look more like strawberry leaves than the other ones. But I speculate as to whether it's a cardoon or a strawberry that's represented in this. And it's a very large quilt. It's probably 95 inches square. Linda and I, this is the first time Linda and I had done an auction where we were sitting right next to each other.
Were you bidding against each other?
No, but I said, well, my limit is 1,500 or something like that. And it had apparently been sold prior to this by the same auction house, and the bidder defaulted on payment, so it went up again. And I guess it had sold for quite a bit more the first time, but I think I got it for $500. And
Bill, do you know, has this quilt ever been published? It looks familiar to me, like I've seen it published somewhere over the years, like in a quilt engagement calendar or some other.
Not that I know of, but the pattern does show up from time to time. And Barbara Brackman did a wonderful blog on this motif, and she might have been speculating that it was strawberries, but I would beg to differ on that. If you've seen this particular one at all, it's been either on my page or on my blog or something like that, but it has not been published as far as I know.
I think you two were supposed to have it.
Yeah.
I think so. I think so. All right, let's move ahead. I've got some more quilt images that show us sort of branching out. I think the next one would be Holy Hexies. And this is also a fairly recent purchase. Either it was right when I met Linda or right before. You haven't seen this, Rod?
No.
Oh, you've been off Facebook. Well, when I saw this quilt, I said, holy hexies, what in the world? It came from Lancaster, Pennsylvania. It's maybe 80 inches square. I have to look again at the dimensions, but all these motifs rendered in small hexagons really, it blew my mind. And I want to know more about it. We think it has some kind of religious affiliation to it because of the large center red cross.
Yeah.
And it has anchors and candles and chalices and keys, flowers, a rainbow that's shaped like the roof of a house, kind of. Two buildings down below, and these strange looking things at the bottom that look like dog bones.
Or keys, kind of. Oh yeah, they do look like dog bones.
At the very bottom, those two little white things.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah.
This is one of the last purchases that I made, and we've been not collecting as much in the last couple of years, which is kind of strange to think because we're all at home on our computers and everything. But we're fairly newly married, and we've been putting our money elsewhere. But this will show you how particular I've gotten, and we both are, about the quilts that are coming to the collection. It has to be pretty sensational like this. And I think this quilt was under 4 figures to buy. It was an auction house, so it was somewhat competitive, but not as much as I thought. Anyway, really spectacular quilt. And this is the kind of thing that we look for now, things that are unique and one of a kind. We only wish we could know more about the maker or makers and what they intended. A lot of people have speculated that it's 2 homes coming together in marriage. I don't know. Could be a lot of things. I don't like to tell stories about quilts as much as I like to talk about what really the nuts and bolts. So let's find another one, because
that's amazing.
A few off. I think I started to download and then I got interrupted. So hold on a minute.
Okay,
Sorry, everybody.
that's okay. There's a quilt that, did you hang the Dahlia quilt in the exhibition at the museum?
Oh, yes.
It didn't have a sleeve on it, but I thought it would be perfect for the show.
We just, if they don't have sleeves, we just put temporary ones on them. So yeah, yours wasn't the only one. We had a few that we had to do that with.
Good.
Well, while we find that.
Sorry, guys. Well, tell me more about how did both all of you get started?
Oh, Lord. Rod, you need to go first on that one.
Okay, but then I might talk too long, but no, briefly, I mean, I started in, well, before, officially in business with Michael Kyle. Our business was Kiracofe and Kyle, was 1978, but we had started buying quilts in Ohio 75, 76, 77. So again, we started out collecting them because we loved them. They reminded me, I was reminded of my grandmother. And then I also had a teacher in college who had an unfinished quilt top hanging on her wall as a work of art. It was a silk log cabin. So both of those in the early 70s, grandmother, of course, was growing up all the time, was just embedded in me. So I was always intrigued by made by women, made by hand, and then how they would relate to, how I would relate to them as works of art. Some, not always, not everyone, but just incredibly beautiful, important objects to be interested in and collect. It wasn't until a friend from college said, have you ever thought of selling them? And no, I'm a collector. I want to buy them and own them. But Michael and I went to a show in Ann Arbor, a great antique show up there, and we sold quilts and we doubled and tripled our money on them. And that seemed like a pretty nice thing to do. Realizing too that I never felt like we could afford to put together the collection we might want to. So I said, let's start a quilt business. And it's kind of like, let's open a lemonade stand today. But traveled to San Francisco, 1978, with a back seat full of quilts, and started showing them. We made the decision that, and we let everyone know, we were not collecting quilts any longer. We didn't want people to feel like we had skimmed off the cream of the group. Everything that we found was available for purchase, which I'm really glad that we did that. It allowed me to start buying and collecting fine art photography, which I was also interested in. So I got to fulfill my collector desire that way. So I came to it as a dealer and then publishing books and all. I had my aha moment in 2004 where I got curious of what about quilts that were made in the 1950s to the end of the 20th century that were outside the realm of quilt guilds. It really was, among quilt historians, it's popular belief that quilts really just stopped being made after World War II, not to pick up again until, the 60s, when some early people started making quilts, and then the 70s and bicentennial, and just the skyrocket that went off after that of buying and selling, dealers, collectors, books. But I'd taken a break from the quilt world, felt like I didn't have anything more I wanted to say after the American quilt and cloth and comfort. But I had this aha moment and curiosity, and eBay had started. I'd learned about eBay kind of through Julie Silber, learned that there were these young new dealers selling quilts online. I thought, what's this all about? So I ventured in just to see, and I decided I wasn't trying to put together any particular kind of collection, or didn't even know if it would happen or not, but I was just going to buy what I liked, what appealed to me. I set some criteria about design and themes, but it really was more from the art of the quilt for me, the background of it, that I got hooked again on buying quilts and putting together then like, oh, this is a collection. Who knew? Who would have thought it? Or it was unexpected to me that it's gone where it has gone. So
that's around the time that our paths first crossed. I'll never forget you coming to my house to look at quilts one day. You're going to be in the Portland area. And so I brought out all my best quilts and had them all stacked up and everything. And you had kind of a puzzled look on your face the whole time, because I was showing you these 1850s quilts and all these New York beauties. And what I didn't realize was that you were up to unconventional and unexpected and wanted to see all the polyesters, which I didn't show you at all. And I felt terrible afterwards, but let's come back.
no, I love seeing a beautiful quilt no matter what age.
Oh, I know.
It is, but yeah, that was a fun time.
Like I didn't bring out the good china that day in a way.
Misread that audience. Yeah.
Yeah, I did. So I got a couple more pictures if you have found
Right.
it, Marissa. The giant dahlia I thought was a really good one for the exhibition at the Iowa Quilt Museum, because the theme was "Here Come the Sun, Here Comes the Sun," and it looks like a big sun. Even though this is a known pattern, it's hard to come by, and it's especially hard to come by in this form where they have followed the pattern, the original Hubert Vermeeren pattern, which I should note, he had a business that was out of Des Moines, Iowa, and he created all of these large medallion, like maybe half a dozen large medallion designs that were sold as patterns and maybe kits. But this example of the giant dahlia is as close to the pattern published by Vermeeren as you could find, including the fabulous Art Deco edge finish and the specific quilting design that was used. So when you look closely at it, and if you can see details, if you go on my blog, you can see detail photos of it. It's a really exact rendering of this design. And so if we see something like this at this point, it'll still turn our heads, even though it's a published design and there's more than one of them out there. We couldn't find one more perfect than this.
No, the maker is a master quilter. Everything.
Absolutely. Yeah. And as far as we know, Vermeeren did not make quilts, but the business involved buttons and embroidery and mail order type things. I think they published designs that were printed on fabric that were used as guides for embroidery, things like that. And right there in Iowa.
Awesome. Very cool.
Yeah. What else have we got here? I should probably fast forward real quick to the, actually, let's do that real quick. The pictorial. Yeah. I know we're kind of running out of time, but we will zoom into the future real fast. This one came from Shelley Ziegert, and it's included in a number of her, books and exhibitions. And it's also the type of thing that we look for nowadays. If we're looking at quilts, Linda and I, we recognize that this is a one-of-a-kind original. It was made sometime in the 30s, maybe 40s, in Ohio, which is kind of fun because it's got Ohio Star corners to it. Looks like it has bits and pieces of things that were sort of put together. I'm not sure if it was intended that way, with the diamonds in the trees and the triangles in the trees. I love how the color of the blue in the sky is different under the rainbow as it is the sky above it. I love the sun peeking out. Some really great sewing work if you look at the quilting in this, number of stitches per inch and so forth. But a lot of the design is kind of wonky, and the quilt itself is wonky. It's a little bit wavy on the edges. So I love those imperfections. And once you see this quilt, you never forget it.
Yeah.
That's a very unique quilt.
So around the time that Rod was getting into unconventional and unexpected, I had come off of the experience of seeing the G's Bend exhibition in New York. And I neglected to include the one G's Bend quilt that we have in our collection, but it was made by Lucy Mingo, and you can find it online if you look. The next thing that I discovered was polyester quilts, and there was something we need to go to the Rickrack Tiles.
Okay. Oh,
This one was included in my exhibition at the International Quilt Museum, and it's made out of polyester patchwork. The black lines, which you can't see unless you zoom in on it or go to a zoom in picture, would be it's made out of rickrack, those black lines. And instead of being sewn on top, the patches are actually held together with they're stitched to the rickrack. This person was crazy.
wow.
And the piece is probably, 110 inches square. It was made as a finished, edge finished bedspread with no backing at all. We put a backing on, and it's been exhibited and not really published too many places, maybe a couple magazines.
It looks like stained glass.
It really
Yeah.
does. It's a phenomenal piece, and it is like the epic 1970s quilt for me. One of the things I did with 1970s was a little bit of research into the development of the polyester fabric and why it was so color fast. And there's a paper out there on academia.edu that talks about collecting the polyester quilts, where I go into a little bit of the innovation in fabrics, why they were so color fast, and the introduction of day glow fabrics, which is all very fascinating and specific to a certain time period later than the mid-century, 20th century. So quickly to the next one, we've got a black and white one.
Yes.
It was made by Barbara McKee.
Hmm.
Have you seen this, Rod?
No, I haven't.
Well, I went into an antique store in Aurora, Oregon, middle of nowhere. We've been there, right?
Yeah,
There's a clock guy there.
Yeah.
And there's this antique store, and there was a basket on the floor that had this quilt, and I saw an embroidered name. If you look at the very, very bottom, you can see Barbara McKee, 74.
Oh yeah.
And I thought, wow, that looks like some kind of spy versus spy thing. I've never seen a black and white quilt from that period. It was so bold and interesting. It was $250, and I said, I just took it, hugged it, and went to the register immediately. And later found out, soon after found out that it was published in a book that was released the same year the quilt was made, called The Complete Guide of Quilting, or something like The Complete Guide to Quilting. I have a blog post about this. The design is called, and the quilt is called, Interacting Pyramids by Barbara McKee, who, as it turns out, is an art quilter. She makes, I think, pictorial type of quilts. And anyhow, we love this one. And yeah, it's really one of our favorites.
That is, amazing.
So there's just two more that I had. Do we have time for that?
Yeah. See,
All right.
Hawaiian.
Yes. Go to the greenish that one first. While we were looking at 1970s quilts, there was something that occurred to me, and it was right around the time I went to QuiltCon in Austin and had a show of 1970s quilts, which, as it turns out, were very influential. Rod had an exhibition the year before at the first QuiltCon, or 2 years before the first QuiltCon, and were they one year? Was there 1 year between them, or two? I can't remember. But anyway, right around the time I was at QuiltCon, I think 2015, I was discovering a connection between these 1970s quilts and a movement that was going on in Hawaii with scrap fabrics. And This was a pretty prolific thing in Hawaii that they would use these scrap fabrics, especially as the companies that were manufacturing garments closed down. And so I sort of happened upon this whole tradition of Hawaiian scrap quilts, mostly 1960s and 70s, a lot of wonderful wild colors. This one is actually like a broken dish type thing, and the black that looks like sashing is really a line that goes through the patches. Very interesting construction, but really bold and dynamic. And there was something very interesting to me because Hawaiian quilts are known to be these austere, botanical, symmetrical applique quilts of 2 colors with echo quilting. And they go for tens of thousands of dollars when you see really great examples. This was a really more down-home style where they were using scraps of fabric, which led me all the way back to the Queen's quilt made by Liliuokalani when she was imprisoned in the Iolani Palace during the overthrow of the Kingdom of Hawaii. So for me, these scrap quilts had their roots in Hawaiian culture, and it was just emerging during this time period. I have one more example that we can show, and it's the pink one.
Gorgeous.
This is really, really epic example. Somehow I picked things that I knew Rod would like today. This one is huge. It's probably like 90 or 100 inches tall, and or as we look at it vertically like that, it's got a wonderful binding that's the same thickness as all the strips. It's string pieced on foundation. I found a lot of characteristics running throughout the Hawaiian scrap quilts. A lot of them were foundation pieced on cloth. They were using a variety of fabrics that would be a little unwieldy to try to piece together and not have them be warpy and wonky and too wild. So there were a lot of foundation pieced on fabric and a lot of designs that had diagonals in them, which I thought was really interesting if you consider the diagonals that you see in Hawaii, everything down to the palm trees with their diagonal bark design and other types of design that emerged in Hawaii, decorative arts and arts around the home. So that was the latest thing for us. And pandemic hit. We got married 2 months before the pandemic hit, and so we've been
That was good timing, actually.
yeah, we got to spend some time at home.
Yeah.
Our quilting activities have not been as great as they were before. We were members of the Portland Modern Quilt Guild, and I brought Linda into that whole thing. We went to Quilt Market. She actually got to meet Carrie and Nancy from Houston and all this stuff.
Yeah, it was fun.
But we're waiting to get back into it.
So Linda, did you like quilts, or were you even knowledgeable about quilts until you met Bill, or before you met Bill?
Yeah, my mother was she sewed, and she sewed a lot of clothes for us, and I have found a couple of quilts when we're cleaning out their house, and I've been interested in them always, but just had no idea that it was as huge as it was. I mean, I didn't know it was $1 billion industry.
Yeah.
And the quilt market was really, really interesting. I mean, fascinating. I had no idea.
Yeah, the first time we met, actually, I told her that I was going to go to the Antiques Roadshow and bring a quilt. And I didn't get on TV. Regrettably, they missed their opportunity. But I showed her this quilt.
Yes.
Continue.
And so he tells me that he's got this quilt, or I said, "What are you bringing to Antiques Roadshow? What quilt?" And he said, "Well, you're not going to know what it is. It's a really obscure, design in the middle." It took me a long, long time to figure out what it was. And he opens it up, and I said, "Oh, I know what it is. I'm a member." It was an American Legion Auxiliary quilt. Done in 1930 from the original post here in Oregon, in Salem, Oregon, and it has the signature of one of the founders of Oregon. It's the great granddaughter-in-law of the woman who's considered the mother of Oregon, Tabitha Moffett Brown's great granddaughter, and she was the ringleader of the quilt. There's also 2 gold stars by names that are inscribed on the quilt, and they were people who died during the service. In service of our country. It's all white, and it just has the emblem in the middle, then all the signatures around it in pen. And it just, it's absolutely stunning. Embroidered. Yes, embroidered, not in pen.
Wow.
It's
Wow.
gorgeous. Yes.
I do want to get one question. We're a little over, but that's okay. Sarah Molson had a question. She wants to know how you collectors store and take care of your quilts, since you have so many.
That's
Or
always
do you
the
not want to
question.
tell
That's-
people?
that's
I think Roderick has the best idea. Sell them.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, for sure. I feel that they deserve to be in museums and should be saved there for more people to see. But I was fortunate to have this old barn behind our house in San Francisco that I was able to turn into a great storage space and have a wall to hang quilts and big desk to work on. I use a dehumidifier periodically. I've never had any problem with, mildewing or they get opened and folded quite frequently because they're either going out to shows or various things. So it's not any museum quality storage by any means, but it works. Yeah.
Yeah.
We have our best quilts in boxes, acid-free boxes for, the really great cotton quilts from the mid, 19th century. Our polyester ones are a little bit more loosely packed around. They don't get as many fold lines because they've got this lofty batting a lot of the time. And the
And we use
polyester.
them.
And we use them.
Yeah.
Actually, we got not a great night's sleep last night because we had this other quilt, this old quilt that was creeping off the bed.
It keeps sliding off the bed.
It
but
kept
it's a
sliding
cool
off
one.
and dragging our covers
It's a
with
really
it.
good
It's
one, though.
it's like from the 1850s,
Yeah.
and it's really nice.
I mean, you need to use the quilts. The quilts are meant to be used. I mean, the not the really, really falling apart ones, but yeah, they're they're warm. They're like a hug.
We love them.
Right? Yeah.
Marissa, do we have time to show one more? I saw that Philip Campbell is on,
Yeah.
and I have a quilt that I acquired from him
Oh,
that I'd love to
wonderful.
show.
Do that, and then I'm just gonna, you get yourself ready, and then I'm going to, someone asked me to talk about the quilt behind me. And it's just, actually I have a couple of people comment, it's I made that quilt. It's a wedge wooler quilt, and I belonged to a guild back in Washington, and it was a class that my mom actually taught, and she had some Dick Tracy fabric, the black and white. It's like comic fabric, and I was like, that is really cool. And so I asked her if I could take it, and she said yes. And then it's long armed on her machine. We both actually did different parts of it. So that's the quilt.
I love it.
It's beautiful.
Thank you. So Roderick, tell us
Okay,
about this one.
so I've recently, and maybe it was during the pandemic, I've been watching the contemporary quilt world and contemporary quilt makers and the modern, and it's been fun to see what people are making and being inspired by. But this is a quilt that I bought from Philip Campbell, who is a quilt maker in Indianapolis, Indiana. It was a series that he did called Security Blankets, and he titles it Ghost Bunny. But many of you know, or some know through Instagram, I learned from my husband a tradition that his mother learned in boarding school about saying rabbit, rabbit. The first thing you say on the first of the month, every month. And we have done that for now 30 plus years. So I have this, I love the rabbit motif, and this double rabbit, I thought I have to have this. It's got faux bunny fur on the binding.
Oh my gosh.
The back fabric is pink unicorn flannel, and most of the front, I forget what the story is of the fabrics of those, but I'd included this in the show, and when I saw that Philip was actually here, I wanted to show it. Just and then just quickly, if we can, I know we're going over.
That's okay.
This is a top that I owned the top And a few years ago, I offered them to quilt makers and some artists. I just wanted to put them out there in the world and give them to people to see what they might do with them. This one went to Zach Foster, and he appliqued this phrase on the quilt or on the top. And then he said, I'm not sure if I should quilt this, how I should quilt it. And I said, what about tying it? Because I love tied quilts. And he did, all within the black letters, which gives them kind of a texture, or it looks like they're part of that fabric. But and so I said, can I buy it back from you? And he said, sure. So this is another acquisition that I've made of a contemporary quilt maker. So I don't know if I'm going into forming a contemporary collection or not, but I have acquired some wonderful pieces from people that I really, whose work I like.
You go where the universe takes you, huh?
Yep, yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you for indulging me on that. Are there questions from people?
Yeah, let's see. Do we have any more questions? This is time. This is the time.
Now, sure.
I don't know. Well,
Guess not.
it went in while I'm saying our closing comments, then we will take it. But first, I just want to thank Roderick and Bill for joining us today. You showed us some amazing quilts and very different from one another. And I think that's just so neat because it just shows us the diversity of quilting through our generations. And that's, I think, one of the strengths of the quilting world. So thank you. Oop, I'm seeing some questions coming in real quick. Oh, everyone's saying thank you. And so just, we agree. So at the Iowa Quilt Museum, this is the last week to see Here Comes the Sun. We're going to be switching it out at 4 p.m. on Sunday. We take this exhibit down, and then on Monday, we're going to be putting up Deeds Not Words, which is the 100 years of suffrage women's quilts. I've been reading the placards, and it's going to be a very powerful exhibit. Made me cry a little, I'll admit it. So we look forward to having that up. We always are sad to say goodbye, but thank you to everybody who has shared your quilts in this exhibit, and that's what we have. So more Tuesdays at 12s will be coming as we start to organize those. We do have airing of the quilts on June 4th here in Winterset, and we are going to have classes and a retreat before the actual airing on that Saturday. So keep an eye out for more information on all of that. Any other words?
Thank you, everyone, for attending and sharing the time with us.
Yeah.
Thank you, Iowa Quilt Museum in Carissa.
Thank you, guys. Bye.
Nice to hear you and Linda talk, Bill.
Nice to meet
Yes.
everybody.
It's good to see you all.
Nice to meet you guys. My West Coasters.
Yes.